Well, hello my friends, hope you are well. Today we're continuing progress on our kitbashed 40k Swamperial Guard army, whipping up this Leman Russ spider tank hybrid monstrosity, which is debatably as game legal as it is arachnophobe friendly, but it looks cool, so we're going with it.
Swamp Ramp Miniatures.
So after building my first Leman Russ a while ago, I had this additional section of a hull, a turret, and a bunch of other little details left over. And I wanted to make use of these instead of just discarding them into my ever-expanding pile of shame like an unwanted puppy, while still giving it a distinctly swampy twist so it'd look different from the last tank and fit the aesthetic of the army. Luckily, I had recently purchased this juicy old Arachnorock spider from Age of Sigmar, and this freaky little thing will make the perfect mobile carriage for the tank to sit on, as well as being justifiable in the lore of our army. The headcanon for this guy is that our green boys have lovingly fed and nurtured a variety of hideous, disgusting swamp creatures so they could be incorporated into the Swamperial Guard alongside all of their salvaged gear. And a quick side note, this thing came with the most ridiculously sized base ever. You could genuinely eat your dinner off this thing, and I have, so yeah. But after a little bit of assembly, we can see the rough idea here, and it looked fairly promising, so it was time to bring this Frankenstein arachno tank to life. My first port of call was to trim down some areas of the big juicy spider booty so I could offset the hull of the tank towards the back of the carapace, which would help to maintain a more spidery silhouette later on. A few gentle adjustments made this possible, and after gluing the tank into place, I also wazzed off this section at the back here to make it a bit more streamlined. After mixing up some of this bizarrely coloured millipart, I squished it into the gaps around the bottom of the tank and the spider's body to make it all a bit more sturdy. Then I covered up the side flaps with a couple of pieces of plasticard, giving them some texture with my signature sandwich bag tie corrugated metal effect. This section of the spider booty had quite a big gap in it, but I didn't want to add too much unnecessary weight to this mini, so I filled it up with some tin foil first and entombed it with a thin layer of green stuff, never to be seen again, like my childhood cat after it went to live at that farm. Wait. I also attached this random miscellaneous plastic object to the bottom here to give the rear of the tank a more kind of industrial look, using a bit more green stuff to extend the spider's shell and fuse the two sections together. Now we had accomplished the basic polymerization of machine and giant disgusted arachnid freaky thing, we could start layering down some extra details to make this a bit more interesting. I started with a couple of exhausts and a bit of added texture on the rear first, then moved on to the front where I did this little window port and whipped up a makeshift armoured housing for a heavy bolter. I used some leftover pieces from the extra sponsons for this, combined with a bunch of wooden matchsticks and pieces of plasticard to get my usual kind of ramshackle makeshift swampy armor going on, and this side looked pretty cool, but this one looked pretty shit, so I ripped it off and redid it, using more of this diamond texture plasticard and some sandwich bag ties as makeshift metal bracing, which still didn't look perfect, but a bit better at least. I wanted to add some angled side skirts next, as the flat ones were looking less than satisfactory at this point, and again, I did this using the same rickety and nonsensical mixture of wood and scrap metal our green boys are known to use for up-armoring their vehicles. I stuck this all on quite willy-nilly at first, as I can use my clippers to come back in afterwards and trim off any bits that are too long, but I do make sure to leave these pieces quite jagged and uneven as it adds to the overall makeshift vibe. And once I'm happy with that, I add another layer of wonky cross-bracing sections which just push that effect a little bit further and give everything a really cool thrown together look. After that, it was time to add the turret, and I decided to go for the exterminator loadout on this guy. Mainly because the double skinny barrels worked quite well with the multiple skinny spider legs. I had thought about magnetizing this one to make use of all the leftover main weapons, but I also thought I can't be so I didn't bother. Those were the main large additions I wanted to make to this baby, but a few smaller finishing touches always help. So I used a couple of guitar strings to add a comms array on the back of the tank, having the coiled ends up in the air to look like receivers. Then I added a little searchlight here and a leftover auto cannon there, which in my head is remote controlled when the main hatch is closed. With that, the construction of our swampy arachno tank thingamabob was now completed, and it was looking pretty cool overall. I wasn't completely happy with the bottom edge of the tank. I felt like it wasn't blended as well with the spider body as I'd hoped, but like every good problem, I had a plan to just cover it up later, using a bit of swampy foliage to stay on theme. And of course, no Swamperial Guard build would be complete without some pesky little green boys, so I whipped some up, with the first being this cool kind of paratrooper looking grot with a slimmer profile helmet and some pouches up front. The second got a few gently destructive adjustments with my Dremel to create this kind of hybrid green boy lasgun equipped fella, and the actual tank commander himself made use of this padded helmet from the Lehman Russ sprue. I trimmed down a Gretchen head to fit inside it, and it felt a little bit weird not having his ears poking out the side, but I also found the thought of them being all curled up in there like quavers quite amusing, so we're rolling with it. Then last but not least, I stuck a snotling onto a little ramshackle wooden platform, and he's equipped with a trumpet to relay signals from the tank commander to the rest of the army in a fitting low-tech green boy manner. With all our miniatures now lovingly assembled, we were ready to get started on the painting. But before I do that, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Terry from Famard, who'd very kindly sent me this acrylic carry case for my miniatures, which has actually been really useful, as I'd just been storing my army in random drawers up to now where they'd get a little bit battered up, but now they're safe and sound in this case where they're protected from dust and damage, and I've had it sat on my desk now since I've got it, so I can stare at my army all day long, baby. Most of my kitbashed units so far have been unnecessarily tall, which will limit the amount I can keep in here, but if you're playing regular armies, or mostly infantry especially, you'll get a ton of miniatures in here. These trays all come out and they're magnetic, so you can keep your miniatures extra secure if you whack a magnet onto their bases. And yeah, overall I do think this is a good quality. It's easy to build, just make sure you read the instructions properly, and make sure you take all the protective film off the acrylic once you're done. If I'm being really honest, my only criticism is that I think the price is a little bit high, but yeah, this thing is quite sturdy, so if you want to grab one for yourself, there will probably be a link in the description or in the comments or on screen now. But yeah, thank you Terry. Now back to the painting. I'm starting with the spider first, and I wanted to get a kind of weird putrid fleshy colour going for the bottom of the carapace, so I mixed together some Bugman's Glow and some Leviathan Purple contrast paint for the base coat, then built up some additional layers of highlights on top, using a bit more Bugman's Glow each time. I didn't go too crazy with this, as most of it's not really visible now, and in fact by the time the miniature was completely finished, it was so non-visible that I might as well have painted a huge monster spider down here, because it would have made no difference. But I digress. Up next was the armoured Shelly pieces on the body and the legs, for which I just use a nice black contrast paint, following it up by dry brushing a bit of a dark grey around the edges and any textured areas to bring back a bit of definition. I took this further with a slightly lighter grey-blue colour, also using it to add some scratchy lines here and there for added pizzazz, and picking out some of the little raised nodules around the face and pincers. For the pincers themselves, I started with a darker brown colour and built up to a kind of bony coloured highlight over the course of a few layers. Then I coloured in the cluster of beady little eyeballs, finishing them off with a nice red highlight. And in my opinion, spiders have way too many eyes, the little shits. Why do they need so many eyes? What are they doing with them? And why won't they all just piss off away from me? After a few little tidy ups though, our Spidey boy was now finished, and he got quite a simple paint job, to be honest. There's really nothing fancy going on here, but sometimes simple is good, and I was happy with how he was looking, although his general spiderness was still repulsing me. So up next was our tank, and if you watch my first Lehman Russ build in this army, it's going to be the exact same paint job here really, starting with the wood first, so I can do a bit of dry brushing and wash sloshing without worrying too much about overspilling onto other areas. Then moving on to our signature purple colour for this army, which I've come up with a bit of a lore explanation for now actually. I had chosen it originally just because I like purple and I think it contrasts well against the green skin, but since we've started a little lore diorama build series now, I have concocted a bit of a backstory for the significance of the colour purple in the Swamperial Guard. We'll go over this in future though, and if you're wondering what the hell I'm doing with this stippling, it's going to give us a nice patina in a moment when we've ground her up, so just hold your horses. For the final bit of base coating, I did some metallic details just to get everything popping a bit more, and then it was time to slather this baby up in a healthy coat of streaking grime. This has become a staple in the Swamperial Guard recently, especially for these larger armoured pieces, as it's by far the easiest way to build up a thick, dirty and grimy surface layer on the paint, which is exactly what we'd expect to see on old Imperial Guard gear that's been laying around in the swamps waiting to be rescued and repurposed by our scampy little green boys. Plus, all the time I save by adding grime in this way is extra time I can spend watching the X-Files in my pants. But anyway, I do a bit more of my rough purple stippling to top up that patina again where it's become slightly too dark from the grime, tickle the wood with a little bit of dry brushing for the same reasons, then hit the metallic sections with a 2-stage rust treatment this time, going for a base layer of dirty down rust first, then using a brighter orange rust effect paint on top of that to bump up the contrast a bit. The last detail on the tank was this searchlight on the turret, for which I did a really rough and ready OSL effect, just trying to keep it quite subtle, but again giving it some parity with the previous Lehman Russ, and then we just had our green boys to go. I won't bother showing you much of this today as we see it in every installment of the Swamperial Guard build, so you all know the drill by now, and if you don't, feel free to check out some of the previous videos for a bit more context. But I will say, in every batch of these green boys I kitbashed, there's always one standout who's my favourite little guy, and this time it's definitely our little paratrooper looking boy here. I just think he turned out really well and he was super fun to paint, so he's got me thinking about how I can incorporate more guys with a build similar to him in future units. Maybe I should just give our shock troopers more of a kind of airborne vibe like him, but let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions as well. Anyway, I glued all of our green boys into place, and the only thing left to do was add a bit of our usual swampy foliage to keep this on brand and hide some of those bottom edges of the tank I mentioned earlier. So I stuck on a bunch of this kind of hanging moss foliage stuff first, trimmed off the excess to get it a bit more under control, and finally mixed in some of this leafy foliage as well. You know I love this leafy foliage, I use it all the time, and I want to be buried with it glued onto my face. Now, let's see how it all turned out. So my friends, what do you think? Another happy little addition to our Swamperial Guard forces, and I did mention at the beginning of the video that this is very unlikely to be game legal. I mean, it's not drastically bigger than my previous Lehman Russ, but I can't see myself turning up to an official tournament with this and not being told that I've modeled for advantage in some way. But that's okay, because we don't give a shit about official tournaments. When I eventually play with this army, it's all going to be filthy casual play, and I will throw a massive tantrum if I'm not allowed to field this bad boy. I'm planning to use it as a tank commander unit just because I think it looks sweet being a tank with a kind of slightly higher profile looking out over the battlefield with our commander and our snotling trumpeter, Snonald Trump, blasting out signals left and right. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked about this addition to the army. It might even be my favourite unit so far. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe or leave a like or a comment. Let me know if you'd rather fight a ferret or a mongoose. And as always, I have been your friendly neighbourhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon in another video. See ya!